from his mother's womb. Jeremiah wrote that God knew him while he was still in his mother's womb. And then the final 6 verses speak about the importance of staying away from destructive relationships and allowing God's work to take place in our inner person. David said, "Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, you bloodthirsty men, for they speak against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate them, O Lord, who hate you? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with a perfect hatred. I count them my enemies." Okay. Okay. Give me the signal when you want me to start. Good evening and welcome to Destiny Church. We are starting all over again because the sound was not working, so please stay tuned. We invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook at Destiny Church CT. Share these videos, start a watch party, and share the good news of Jesus Christ. And guess what? I got to try out my message for a little while before actually doing it live. So let's try this again. Psalm 139 represents one of David's masterful compositions regarding God's involvement in every aspect of our lives from beginning to end. It has 24 verses that can be divided into 4 stanzas, each with 6 verses that focus on a different aspect of God's tender handiwork and protective care for each of us. The first 6 verses speak of God's intimate knowledge about you and about me. David wrote, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word in my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You have hedged me behind and before and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain unto it." David is saying, God, you know me so good. You know me better than anyone else. You know me so well that you even know when I'm going to sit down, stand up. You know where I'm going to go throughout the day. You know what I'm going to say before I even say it. And God, you love me no matter whether I'm perfect or imperfect. If I make a mistake, you are there beside me. You have hedged me about. You've laid your hand upon me. And it speaks to that circle of love that we've been talking about in these lessons. The next 6 verses highlight God's continual care for us no matter what happens in our life. David said, "Where can I go from your spirit, and where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and light are both alike to you." These verses speak to the fact that God is there in the good times, the bad times, in the high times, the low times. When we think he's not there, he is always holding us. Even when it's dark, God has a light that is shining around us. The next 6 verses speak of God's handiwork at our very moment of conception in every one of our lives. David said, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God! How great is the sum of them! If I should count them, they would be more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. You talk about tender, loving, intimate knowledge. God formed us, every one of us, so skillfully and so carefully. He chose our hair color, our skin color, our eye color, the size of our nose and the shape of our eyes. And he chose how big our hands would be, our feet, and how tall we would be, how short we would be. He put together everything to form each of us into a unique person that reflects his image. The final 6 verses talk about the importance of staying away from destructive relationships and allowing God to work on our inner person. David said, "Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, you bloodthirsty men, for they speak against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate them, O Lord, who hate you? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with a perfect hatred. I count them my enemies." Now let me stop a minute and say, this does not mean that God wants us to go around hating people. But this is talking about being very careful about who we hang out with and who we allow to influence us. Because if we hang around people that hate God, it's going to bleed over into our lives. We should love what God loves and hate what God hates, and try to form alliances with people that will help us to draw closer to God. And the last 2 verses say, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, my fears, God, what bothers me, and see if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." I want to focus on Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14. If I could get that there. No, there we go. It says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." Psalm 8 and 5 says that he crowned us with glory and honor and made us a little lower than the angels. When we think about how amazing it is that God created us the way he did, one of the most amazing aspects of our fearful and wonderful creation means awe-inspiring and so amazing that we should stand in reverence of it, is the development of the human brain. And I've done quite a bit of research into the human brain. I'm fascinated by it, especially as it pertains to male and female differences. And I've written about it in my book, Imago Dei, Restoring the Creator's DNA. But during the first 8 weeks of right after conception, the male and the female brain are essentially the same. But at about 9 weeks, there are dramatic changes that take place. About the 9th week in a male fetus, there is a testosterone wash that goes over the brain, and it changes the developmental direction towards masculinity. It radically transforms the male brain. It causes it to change colors. It eradicates some of its communication cells, including part of a nerve bundle called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is the part of the brain that connects the emotional right brain hemisphere with the left brain hemisphere, where language is focused. So this testosterone also increases the volume of neurons and circuits located in a male's sex and aggression centers that orients a man towards action and a preference for things over people. Conversely, in a female brain, we have a greater interconnectivity between our left and right hemispheres because we don't get that male testosterone wash. In fact, a female's communication and emotional centers will increase and develop a superior neurological network. That's why women can outtalk men. Just ask my husband. He always says, you have 8 arguments before I finish one. So a female, the corpus callosum that connects our right and left brains, grows up to 25% larger than a male's, and it becomes capable of transmitting great quantities of emotional information between both sides of the brain. Now, what happens to a female is they go through something called infantile puberty, and what happens to a girl at that point is during the time of 6 to 30 months of age, a girl's body starts producing massive amounts of estrogen. It's comparable to adult levels. And it's similar to the testosterone wash that a male brain gets in the womb, but this happens when a girl is older and a toddler. She gets this estrogen bath that just bathes her brain, and it's known as the intimacy hormone, and it stimulates female brain circuits and creates this desire for bonding, for relationship, for nurturing, and communication. Now, the human brain it's one of the most amazing things that has ever been created. It's approximately 3 pounds in size. It's estimated to have more than 100 billion nerve cells and over 1 trillion supporting cells. And every nerve cell can have up to 10,000 connections to other nerve cells. Now, if you're glazing over, yeah, I am too. But it just tells you the magnitude of the activity going on in our brain. By some estimates, it's possible that the brain's interconnectivity could boast over a quadrillion connections. Now, for all our computer gurus and IT people, that means the human brain holds approximately 1.25 terabytes of data. It performs at approximately 100 teraflops, which means 100 trillion point operations per second. Do you realize how fast your brain is working? You know, just move your hand, move your leg. It can't do any of that without your brain. Your brain is sending signals. Even every breath you take, everything, the brain is just constantly working, sending signals all over your body. The human brain experiences emotions. It can rewire itself. It's based on new experiences or a change of understanding. It can grow new components called neurons. Ultimately, the human brain represents the most marvelous piece of divine engineering, the most sophisticated, elegant, biological piece of machinery that's ever been known. Now, I want everybody to look at your hand. Look at your hand. You got 5 fingers. I got to reading about fingers and the function of the different fingers, and I want to share just a few highlights with you that just illustrates how amazing God created us. If you look at your thumb, move your thumb. Your thumb has 2 bones, and it plays a very important role that no other finger can claim. A thumb can bend and stretch in the opposite direction of our fingers in order to grip things. In fact, it can practically move all over the place. Now, your next finger is your index finger. And you may think that the index finger or the pointer finger is the most important finger. But hand surgeons say that if you're going to lose one finger, the index finger is actually the best one to lose. Now, I don't want to lose any fingers, but if you had to lose a finger, this is actually the best one to lose. Why is that? It's because the middle finger, your brain will quickly bypass and start to use the middle finger in place of the index finger if you lose it. That's how amazing your brain is. It will rewire itself and begin to allow your middle finger to function like your index finger. So you could basically say that your middle finger is like an understudy for your index finger, and it assists and supports an everyday task. Now, your ring finger is the weakest finger, and it's the most dependent digit of all. Now, your pinky. You might think, well, that little pinky, that's not too important. Well, I'm here to tell you that the pinky is actually one of the most important fingers because it contributes to 50% of your hand strength. Try doing push-ups without your pinky, and you will suddenly find out how important your not push-ups, pull-ups. Try doing pull-ups without your pinky, and you will find that it's very difficult to do it. If you try to do pull-ups without your index finger, it won't be near as difficult as it was to try to do it without your pinky. And if you try that, you'll find out how disabling it is to lose a pinky. But when I was, reading about this, what really struck me was how quickly the brain can adjust and start using the middle finger in place of the index finger if it becomes necessary. I tell you, we are truly, fearfully, and wonderfully made. The way our brains adjust and find ways to keep our body functioning testifies to this reality. So tonight, our brain topic is going to focus on brain diet. Brain diet. Are we healing or killing our brains? Can we get that graphic up there? Brain diet. Healing or killing our brains. There's so many different diets. Now, if you look there is a real healthy side and a very unhealthy side. There is a Big Mac side and a kale side. But there's so many different kinds of diets nowadays. You got keto, paleo, raw diet, Mediterranean diet, low carb, no sugar, vegan, vegetarian, dairy-free, gluten-free, or you have the seafood diet, which means you just eat everything that you see. So, what is a brain diet? A brain diet is not focused on the food we eat, but on the things that we ingest into our minds. We are what we eat. Now, I'm not sure you've ever heard of this. Those that are involved in the medical world, I'm sure will have heard of this, epigenetics. I was first introduced to this area of study during one of my counseling classes by a guest lecturer, Dr. Clay Jackson. And epigenetics is an emerging area of scientific research that shows how environmental influences impact the expression of our genes. So things that happen to us during childhood actually impact how our genes grow and develop. And they have come to understand that trauma and different things actually contribute to health issues that we have later on in life, like high blood pressure or sugar diabetes or just different, even cancer and different things like that we can struggle with later on in life, or if we're addictions and different things. And so we've come to find out that our genes are not set in stone, and that it is no longer nature versus nurture, but both of those combined, nature and nurture combined, to influence our genes and the development of our genes. So childhood experiences, good and bad, can impact our gene development. Trauma, anxiety, instability can possibly make one's DNA more prone to certain diseases or ailments. And Dr. Jennings, in his book that we're using for our study, The God-Shaped Brain, he discusses the impact of anxiety upon brain development in utero. Any unusually high stress causes our bodies to release stress hormones. The big fancy 25-cent word for those stress hormones are glucocorticoids. And if this occurs during a woman's pregnancy, these stress hormones cross the placenta, and it can alter the developing fetal brain. These stress hormones can impair the braking system, like brakes on a car, the braking system on the amygdala, or the fear center of a growing brain, which means that a child born to a high-stress mother will have a brain that's less capable of calming itself and turning off the alarm circuitry. Such children will start life from a baseline that's more anxious and fearful than they would have otherwise experienced. Dr. Jennings further explains that after birth, a baby's brain contains hundreds of millions more neurons at birth than it will have at 8 years of age. This is all of us at birth. During the first 8 years of our life, the brain is busy killing off neurons by the hundreds of millions. Now, that might not sound too productive, but think of it in the context of Michelangelo's block of marble. He said, as the chips fall, the image emerges. And when the artist was finished, he had less marble, but he had a masterpiece. So our brains are being configured from the moment we are born. So the brain comes into the world prepared to be acted upon by education, environment, and experience. Neurons by the millions are just waiting to be retained, strengthened, and expanded. But the unused neural circuits are pruned, deleted, or reassigned. Now, perhaps you may have heard of reports of neglected, abused, or abandoned children that did not have normal language exposure and never learned to speak normally. One case that I will tell you about, I'm going to tell you about two cases, but one case was a child named Jeannie, who at approximately 20 months of age was locked inside a room and spent the next 11 years in isolation. When she was rescued at age 13, she was profoundly disabled, and despite intensive rehabilitative efforts, Jeannie never learned to speak effectively. I read that story and I think, how in the world could someone ever do that to a child? Another case was Kamala, reportedly living with wolves and she was found by a missionary named J.A. Singh when she was 8 years old. She could not speak, but she made inarticulate howling noises. She walked on all fours. She lapped food like a dog. And despite living for 9 more years, she never learned to speak more than 50 words. So these two tragic cases demonstrate that normal human brain processes whereby unused neural circuits either fail to develop or are pruned and deleted, it affects our ability to function. Conversely, active circuits strengthen and expand, and this happens throughout the entire brain, throughout all of our life. Therefore, activities that repeatedly and regularly excite or fire our fear centers, which is the part of our brain known as the limbic system or the amygdala, if you are constantly being traumatized throughout your childhood, it will enhance the development of the brain's alarm system, and it will impair the growth, the healthy growth of our prefrontal cortex, which we talked about. That's the area of our brain where we think and we reason and we make decisions. So, Dr. Jennings further explains, and this just blew my mind, this part that I want to share with you tonight, about how entertainment affects the developing brain. Stay tuned. You're going to be blown away, I think, just like I was, when you see how entertainment affects the developing brain. One of the unheralded factors contributing to the rise of fear and psychiatric disorders is the high prevalence of theatrical entertainment, including television watching among children. Now, let's define theatrical entertainment. What is theatrical entertainment? That is referring to programming designed through pretense or artificial enactments to cause emotional reactions, while for the most part, disengaging critical reasoning. Okay? So earlier we discussed about how the brain kills off hundreds of millions of synaptic connections during the first 8 years of life, and the brain retains active neural circuits while idle ones fail to develop or are deleted. So we have to understand this normal physiological process in order to understand the devastation that theatrical entertainment has wrought on our brains. Theatrical entertainment should not be confused with educational programming. There are things that are educational that don't hurt your brain. But theatrical entertainment, which primarily affects the brain by firing the limbic system. How does it do that? Have you ever watched something and there is like this fight, or you're wondering, it's like you're inching up this roller coaster and you're wondering, is the heroine going to be rescued, or is so-and-so going to get killed, or the ropes when you watch something and you're all into it and you're all tensed up and you feel the fear and all the anxiety of everybody and everything that's going on in that theatrical entertainment primarily affects the brain by firing our limbic system, which is like a fire alarm going off. Would you like to stand and hear a fire alarm go off for hour after hour? Do you know really that's actually what happens in our brains when we're watching this kind of stuff? Theatrical entertainment is designed to elicit an emotional response from the audience, and the more powerful the reaction, the better the program, right? Such programs cause you, think about it, to laugh, to cry, to be afraid, aroused, angry, irritated, frustrated. Have you ever looked at somebody in a story or a movie you're watching and you just get so angry because the person is just horrible? And you just hope something bad happens to that horrible person. Yeah, you're all laughing because you know I'm telling the truth. And we're watching this and we're turning off our critical thinking and we're reacting to what we're seeing. Now, let's be honest. So many shows are so far out of the realm of possibility, and you really have to turn off your reasoning ability to even watch them and allow your limbic system to run ungoverned in order to experience the roller coaster of anxious emotions the show is designed to elicit. Now, theatrical programming has a similar effect on most human brains, but with children between birth and 8 years of age, they are particularly vulnerable because of the massive modification of neural circuitry occurring during this time. Studies have shown that the more theatrical entertainment that children viewed during the first 8 years of their life, the greater the risk of attention, focus, and concentration problems that are caused by dysfunction of the prefrontal cortex. In fact, it's actually very, very bad for a baby between from birth to 2 years old to sit and watch television, because the rapidly changing images cause the brain to short circuit out and not develop properly. And it can rewire a child's brain and make it difficult for them to focus on problem-solving tasks. I wonder if this is why we have a huge rise in attention deficit disorder, because of the propensity of watching so much theatrical entertainment. Now, when I was growing up, I grew up without a television. In fact, Pastor Harvey and I don't have a television in our house even now. But, these days, you don't have to have, quote unquote, a TV. If you have a cell phone or an iPad or a computer, you basically have a TV. But when I was growing up, you had to go out and literally buy a TV. Now, people may have thought that I was shortchanged because I grew up without having a TV. But as I studied this, I realized that, you know what? It preserved my brain instead of nuking my brain. I was actually blessed to grow up that way without a television. Now, a lot of people thought that was old-fashioned and behind the times. But you know what? It actually preserved my brain. And I remember when I was in my English class in junior high school, my English teacher actually told the class, he said, Ruth has this superior imagination and writing ability, and he said, I actually think it's because she doesn't watch TV. He told the class that. It's very interesting, isn't it? And, I remember the one time when I was about 5 or 6 years old, there was a lady in our church that I loved, and I went and spent the night at her house, and her son was not in the church, and he had a television in the living room, and I'd never really been exposed to TV, but he had on this vampire movie. It was this movie about it was black and white, but this scary guy that would go knock on the door, and these beautiful women who were getting ready to go out on a date, and they would think it was the man coming to pick them up, and it would be this horrible guy that was like a vampire. And I tell you, it freaked me out. I couldn't sleep. It did a number on me I still remember it, how horrible it was. And I also remember this movie that I saw one time. I think it was about this doll named Charlie or something that would come to life, and it was spooky. Oh, I don't like horror movies. My girls grew up without theatrical programming and technology as well, because when they were young, cell phones were just starting. It was actually car phones, and they were these massive, things that we didn't have all that stuff when they were growing up. And they have said over and over, actually, how thankful they are that they did not have cell phones and technology when they were growing up. Angel ended up loving to read. She would walk around the yard and tell herself stories by the hours. Miriam loved to make things, and we bought her every kind of art kit and creative toy that you could imagine. She loved to climb trees. Oh, yes, she climbed a tree so high, and the branches were so tiny, it scared the living fire out of me, but thank God she got down safely. And I put her in a cake decorating class. We did creative things. I didn't even realize when I was putting her in a cake decorating class that it would provide the basis for her future business success. But I wonder how much our children have missed out on because we just plop them in front of a TV or put a cell phone or a device in their hand and just let them veg out and never challenge them to learn and grow and develop and become get skills and even social skills. And I remember my girls, they loved playing with the next door neighbors, Stephanie and Allison, and they used to scream, Stephanie, Allison, and they would come running, and then they would go next door and swim in their swimming pool, and they had a wonderful childhood growing and learning and developing social skills and motor skills and creative skills and reading skills, all these different skills. Now, here's what's even more interesting. Let's continue on talking about this. The link between entertainment and violence. Did you know that there is a link between entertainment and violence? You may say, well, no, duh, of course we know that. Well, let me kind of just help you understand it even a little more clearly. Dr. Brandon Sinnerwald did the seminal study on this issue, and it was published in the Journal of American Medical Association in 1992. He wanted to determine if there was a link between television watching and increased violence in society. And this would indicate that a dysfunction in brain circuitry, such as aggression, rage, and anger, arise from the limbic system. Remember, that's the alarm system. While the prefrontal cortex exercises self-control and restraint. Thus, increasing violence indicates the loss of prefrontal cortex control of the limbic system impulses. So he wanted to find out if television watching caused there to be a breakdown of the prefrontal cortex, your thinking and reasoning ability to be able to control your alarm, your fear, your limbic system, okay? That's what he wanted to find out. So his clear indicator of this was violence, homicide rates before television and after television. That's what he wanted to find out, okay? So he chose 3 countries to conduct his research: the United States, Canada, and South Africa. The United States and Canada allowed the introduction of television into their countries in 1945, but South Africa did not allow TV until 1974. And the results of his study were absolutely astounding. Between 1945 and 1974, after the introduction of television, now this was a long time ago, okay? 1945 to 1974, after the introduction of television, listen to this, Canada's homicide rates increased by 92%, despite their strict gun control laws. In the U.S., murder rates increased to 93%, so about the same as Canada's. But South Africa, remember, they didn't have TV during this time. South Africa actually had a 7% decrease in their demographic group in their homicide rate. But here's the kicker. After the introduction of television in 1974, South Africa's homicide rate soared by 130%. So what type of programming was on television in the United States between 1945 and 1974? It was shows like Howdy Doody, Leave It to Beaver, I Love Lucy, Car 54, Gilligan's Island, Rin Tin Tin, Lassie, and The Lone Ranger. And all these shows receive a G rating. Yet homicide rates still increased by 92% in Canada and 93% in the U.S. Now, when the content worsened after 1974, the homicide rate jumped by 130%. So if television watching is playing a role in societal violence, it seems that content is just a magnifier of the problem, but not the core issue. Now, let me say this. In 2007, Frederick Zimmerman and Dimitri Christakis confirmed that educational television watching did not worsen attention problems in children over the age of 2, but both nonviolent and violent theatrical programming did. So think about what's happening to the brains of our children, of our babies, with all of the theatrical programming and all of the technology that we're allowing them to consume. Now, let's think about today. Parents, look at me. Stop a moment and evaluate. We allow our children to sit on Netflix, and yes, adults will even sit on Netflix by the hour and just watch hour after hour after hour of theatrical programming, unsupervised. Oftentimes, kids watch, we'd be shocked if we knew what they were watching, but I want you to think about how this unhealthy habit is destroying the minds of our children, and for that matter, all of our minds, if we allow ourselves to be consumed with it. It's destroying our ability to communicate, to bond with one another. And I want you to think about your habits and ask yourself, could you put down your device and stop entertaining yourself long enough to enjoy dinner with your spouse or your family? Whew. If y'all were sitting in here, I know it'd be really quiet, could hear a pin drop. Do you allow your child to have unfettered, nonstop access to theatrical entertainment? Now, let me say this. I am not citing studies from Christians. This is not a Christian study. These are scientific studies that have been conducted, seminal studies. I just find it fascinating. How is it impacting the development of our children's social skills and our skills, for that matter? Do we know how to communicate with one another? You know, we have more connections than ever before, and yet we are more disconnected than ever before. Now, the primary issue here is neural development and overstimulation of the limbic system by theatrical entertainment, while decreasing the usage of the prefrontal cortex during the developmental years results in children growing up with brains out of balance. And when adolescence is reached and hormones surge, the limbic system becomes inflamed, leading to emotional stability. You know, parents, we don't need to make it any harder for ourselves to raise teenagers. Without prefrontal cortexes that are properly developed to process and restrain the limbic system, and with overly developed emotional centers, such teens not only have higher risks of attention problems, but are more likely to be moody, impulsive, and aggressive, and to suffer increased anxiety and emotional volatility, leading to sexual promiscuity and violence. Now, many movies and music lyrics glorify and promote these kinds of destructive activities, and there's also a corresponding increased risk of alcohol and illegal drug use in attempts to chemically calm ourselves. Now, music videos, which activate limbic circuits. When I was growing up, it was something called MTV. I have no clue what it is now. Maybe it's still there, I don't know. But research by Gina Wingwood and others documented that adolescents who are exposed to rap music videos were 3 times more likely to have hit a teacher, more than 2.5 times as likely to have been arrested, 2 times as likely to have had multiple sexual partners, and more than 1.5 times as likely to have acquired a new sexually transmitted disease, used drugs, and used alcohol over the 12-month follow-up period. And other research documents that watching pop music videos increase the risk of adolescent alcohol consumption by 31%. It's pretty, whew. The statistics are really something. So, Song of Solomon, chapter 2 and verse 15, he wrote that he said, take the little foxes, or catch the little foxes. It's the little foxes that ruin the vineyards while our vineyards are in blossom. And so what he's talking about, he says, it's the little things that ruin the vineyards. Why am I teaching this way? Because I think it's the little things that desensitize us and creep in, and we have to make changes in our habits and what we do. Because the current societal decay transpired over several decades as the enemy has used programming. Isn't it interesting that it's called programming? It's programming has desensitized us to evil. If you want to read 2 really good books about this, 2 excellent books, The Marketing of Evil and How Evil Works. The Marketing of Evil and How Evil Works by David Kapulian. It will change your thoughts about things, but he talks about how things that were unheard of in American society years ago, we would have never countenanced it, how we have been led down this pathway to embrace things that we know are wrong and have become desensitized to it. And you know, it started small. The movie Gone with the Wind came out in 1939. It was based on a book written by Margaret Mitchell. And it was this movie was the very first time a cuss word was allowed in theatrical entertainment. And it caused an uproar. And it was right at the very end where Rhett Butler says to Scarlett, frankly, I don't give a blank, and walks out the door. And he uses the 4-letter word that starts with a D. And most people put God in front of it. Okay? So he said, frankly, dear, I don't give a blank, and walked out. And there was an uproar over that. But, you know, a movie that only had 1 word like that today, you would think, wow, that's like a really clean movie. Yeah? But back then, it caused an uproar. And that little bite of forbidden fruit has led to an entire poisonous menu that is killing millions of minds, and we ingest it many times on the daily, one after the other, killing our brains and not even thinking about it. But what did David say in Psalm 101, verses 2 and 3? David said, I will behave wisely in a perfect or a blameless way. Oh, when will you come to me? I will walk within my house with a perfect heart. How are you walking within your house? What are you looking at within your house? What are your kids looking at within your house? And David goes on to say, I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. I hope you all still love me, but I'm going to ask you a question that I want you to ask yourself the next time you're watching something. I want you to ask yourself, would I watch this or would I listen to this if Jesus was sitting right next to me? Because he is, if you're his child. So how do we correct our brain diet and bring healing to the damage caused by a continual elevation of stress associated with an inflamed limbic system? I'm going to very quickly show you some really great stuff that we can do to repair the damage. I want to tell you about something called brain fertilizer. Anybody ever heard of brain fertilizer? It is BDFN, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. What is brain-derived neurotrophic factor? Big words. It's fertilizer for your neurons. It is actually proteins that cause your neurons to grow stronger and send out more connections to other neurons, increasing the brain circuits. And the brain even then makes new neurons under the influence of these proteins. It's actually, your brain produces this, a healthy brain produces these proteins and helps it to create more neurons and to heal itself. And in the brain, you have these white supporting cells that surround the neurons, and think of it like an astronaut spacesuit. Just like the spacesuit provides a safe environment for the astronaut, these white cells surround the neurons and dendrites and axons and the connections that are called synapses, and it bathes these neurons in this rich nutritional fluids that the neurons like. And so not only do the neurons themselves make this BDNF or brain fertilizer, but the supporting cells make this brain fertilizer too, and it helps keep your neurons healthy. You say, well, how can I make brain fertilizer? Well, I'm going to show you, okay? How many of you want to learn how to make brain fertilizer for your brain to grow? The good news is that many brain regions are changeable throughout life thanks to a condition that we've talked about called neuroplasticity. And this is particularly true of the prefrontal cortex, our seat of critical thinking, reasoning, and judgment. We want this part of our brain to be healthy and developed, and the damage can be repaired. So, what are God's methods for brain health? What exercise can we do to get in shape? What are God's methods for brain health? When we apply his methods for increasing brain health and nurturing mental stability, the prefrontal cortex circuits actually grow stronger, and despite previous damage, healing can happen. So if you're someone who has suffered from abuse, if you've struggled with an overly active limbic system resulting in too much aggression, or if you've watched too much entertainment, or if you struggle with aggression, irritability, impatience, anger, lust, selfishness, fear, or insecurity, yeah, I think we all have problems with that. Don't be discouraged, because God's methods bring healing. So what are God's methods? I'm going to give you 9 things, just boom, 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 real quick as we come to a close. God's methods include, but are not limited to, these things. First of all, they operate in truth, in love, and in freedom. You know, if we are so addicted to entertainment and to our devices, we are not free. We're bound. And we don't need to be bound by that stuff. The only thing we need to be bound to is Jesus Christ. Paul said, I will not allow anything to have power over me. Yeah, that's why we go on fast. I think I need to do a thing about fasting at some point. But so God's methods, what are they? First of all, number one, worshiping a God of love. We've been talking about that, right? And rejecting God concepts that induce fear. That is number one we need to do. We need to have a right concept of God, to understand that God is love, and need to understand that circle of love that he has for us that was illustrated in Psalm 139 that we opened up with tonight. Number two, we need to engage in regular meditation on some aspect of God's character of love at least 15 minutes every day. Regular prayer and meditation every day for at least 15 minutes. Worshiping a God of love, meditating in prayer for at least 15 minutes a day. Number three, be truthful and eliminate the falsehood of any kind from your mind. You know, Shakespeare said, to your own self be true. And Zig Ziglar said, talk to yourself right. This is particularly important for those that have suffered abuse. Abused children, because of the level of brain development, will often misconstrue the meaning of abuse and internalize distortions about themselves. They will blame themselves for what the abuser did to them. And so typically an abused child will believe falsehoods, or even an abused person will believe falsehoods that include ideas such as I'm ugly, I'm gross, I'm nasty, I'm dirty, I'm disgusting, or I'm unlovable. I will tell you that I was overweight for many years, and I saw myself as fat even after I lost weight and was thin. I hated myself after suffering years of emotional, mental, and verbal abuse. I hated myself, but God healed my brain. All such distortions must be replaced with truth. I had to understand that God loved me, and he created me in his image, and I had to develop Christ esteem, not self-esteem, but Christ esteem. Now, while the facts of history cannot be changed, the adult who has suffered abuse can reevaluate the historic event and apply the truth that, here's what we need to understand, the awful feelings once experienced belong to that event, but not to oneself. And this application of truth is healing. Number four, we need to live to give. Yeah, that heals your brain. Actively seek to help others. Get involved in ministry. Get involved in a volunteer activity. Do you know that dozens of studies over several decades have examined the relationships between volunteer work and health-related outcomes? And most studies find that when you volunteer, you're more healthy. When young people volunteer, they have a plethora of positive developmental outcomes. Instead of letting your child sit and veg out on watching Netflix, get them involved in some volunteer work that will actually develop them into a better person. It will help them achieve academically. It will give them civic responsibility and life skills that include leadership and interpersonal self-confidence. And they even did a study and found out that elderly people, you know, the pink ladies at the hospital, you've seen them, and a lot of elderly people will volunteer. They found out that elderly people who volunteer, they actually live longer and have greater health than those that just are all into themselves and don't volunteer. The next one, I want to just finish this because I had to start all over again tonight. So let me just finish. We need to establish relationships with people of loving and mature character and terminate destructive and exploitative relationships. Don't hang out with people that are unsafe. Have safe, good relationships and be a safe person yourself. Next one, trust God. Trust God with your life and your life's outcomes. Choose to fulfill your known responsibilities in harmony with a clear conscience. Do what you know to do, and then leave the rest to God. do the best that you can. And once you've done it, don't worry about it. You know, John Quincy Adams says, duty is ours and results are God's. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So, trust God. Obey God, live in harmony with his precepts, and then let him work everything out. Trust in God. And then live in harmony with the physical design protocols for life. You know what? Eat right, sleep, exercise your mind, exercise your body, avoid toxins, and eat a balanced diet. And for grins and giggles, I thought I would throw in foods that do, yes, they do increase brain health. And ladies, you see, chocolate is on the list. Woohoo! Coconut oil, wild oily fish, green vegetables, avocados, bone broth, broccoli, celery, fermented foods, nuts, berries, beets, and chocolate. And then finally, the last, when mistakes are made, resolve guilt as quickly as possible. Forgive those who mistreat you, and don't hold on to anger and grudges, because that activates the body's inflammatory cascade. So, Ephesians 4:25 through 32 says, stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. And don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. Remember, it's not good for your brain, for anger gives foothold to the devil. If you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good hard work, and then give generously to others in need. Don't use foul or abusive language, but let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your hands will be an encouragement, or your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. The Passion Translation says, let your words become beautiful gifts that encourage others. And do not bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he has identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on the day of redemption. So get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. And finally, resolve fear, because unremedied fear truly destroys our brain. And 1 John 4:18 through 19 tells us that there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. When we love him because he first loved us. So love heals and restores, but genuine love is only experienced when lies about God are removed. It's important that we have a right concept of God. And next week, our lesson is going to be on Eat This Book. We're going to talk about different ways that we can ingest God's word into our minds, our hearts, and our spirits to heal our brain even further. Lord Jesus, your word's amazing. It's a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. God, your word talks about how we serve you with our minds. We are commanded to love you with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. I pray, God, that you would heal our minds, and I pray, Lord, that you would free us from any addiction to entertainment or to things, God, that would harm our brains, that would harm our walk with you, that would make us less of a person than what we need to be as your child. I pray, God, that you would lead and guide us, and that we would walk in our homes with a perfect heart and not set anything evil before our eyes. But God, let us do things that will heal our brains, and that we would be transformed by the renewing of our minds, so we may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Lord, that you can shine brightly in our lives, that we would not be programmed by the world, but we would have our minds stayed on Jesus, and that we would be connected and tuned in to what you intend to do, that we would be prepared vessels, God, ready to meet you when that trumpet sounds, but also ready to engage and to bless those around us as we prepare to lead others to Jesus Christ, as you prepare the greatest harvest that we've ever seen before in our lives. And we thank you, Lord, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. And God, let this seed of this word, don't let it just be snatched away, but let it be planted deep in our hearts and bear fruit, and let us be productive in a new measure. In Jesus' name, amen. And the Lord bless you. I love all of you, and have a wonderful rest of your week.